So very, very warm welcome, and very warm welcome to those of you joining from home as well. Oh, good, great, okay. So what we're going to do is, my name's Amalayodhin, and what we're going to do is continue on from last week, where Satchidasa, if you were here, Satchidasa gave an introduction to these three marks of reality, or three marks of existence, called the Lakshanas. And the Lakshanas are basically the sort of, the marks of samsara, or the marks of our sort of normal kind of everyday experience, basically, unenlightened experience. They're the kind of, they're three characteristics of that particular experience. And as Satchidasa was saying last week, they are Dukkha, or unsatisfactoriness, anicca, or impermanence, and anatta, or emptiness. And this week what I'll be looking at is dukkha, or unsatisfactoriness. Just to say, there's certain topics that teachers, when we sort of dish out the who teaches what week, or who does what bit, never want to do. I never want to do the dukkha one, yeah? Never, because sort of who wants to, sometimes it's incorrectly translated as suffering. Who wants to talk about suffering for 40 minutes, 50 minutes? It's the same on retreat. Sometimes we do the Buddha's life story on retreat, and for different reasons nobody ever wants to cover the enlightenment, because what do you say about that? It's for different reasons from dukkha, but like that's just there's some you try to avoid. So anyway, here I am, but I think there's a few things I can say about it. But I think one of the first things actually to say about all of the Lakshanas, in fact, is that, in fact, any of the sort of wisdom teachings in particular, maybe any teaching at all in Buddhism, is that it always needs to be picked up very carefully. The Buddha said this actually of ideals and of spiritual teachings. He likened it actually to being trained in picking up a water snake. He said that if you pick up a water snake the wrong way, it actually comes back round and bites you. So it would be better if you'd never gone anywhere near it at all. A lot of spiritual teachings are like that, actually. If you pick them up the wrong way, if you get them wrong, they actually become slightly poisonous. It's like picking up a snake in the wrong way. They become slightly poisonous. And you've sort of seen this through history, don't you? You get sort of ideals or values very, very easily become poisoned or misunderstood, and we're better off not picked up at all. So, you could have ideas, for example, of purity, and they become twisted to become racial purity. Or you could have ideas of self-sacrifice, for example, and it becomes twisted to become a suicide bomber. You get all of these sort of examples where ideals are picked up the wrong way, and they actually become poisonous. So this is very similar. This is also definitely the same for the Lakshanas as well. In fact, a lot of what we're talking about in Buddhism can really, as according to the Buddha, can be picked up the wrong way. And this is particularly the case actually because quite often historically what would happen is you wouldn't come across these teachings for quite some time until you'd really sort of soaked up a culture of, say, a monastic atmosphere around you, or a sort of a Buddhist atmosphere around you, until you'd really sort of got a sense of the more fundamental kind of basic teachings, and like mindfulness, like ethics, like all of those things. And then you'd be introduced to these more wisdom topics only on that basis. Now, of course, these days, we're introduced to everything all at once, which is, there's probably no other way around it now, just everything's available, isn't it? So it's not possible to go and sweep leaves in a monastery for 2 years before you get introduced to the teaching on impermanence or something like that, or teachings on meditation. It's like, dosh, okay, here you go. It's all in one. And start to work that out. So that becomes, and that's just sort of the times we live in, and there's no point complaining about it. So it's definitely true of these three Lakshanas, And I can think of all various ways that they're sort of picked up wrong, in fact. Like say, for example, with impermanence. Well, it was interesting. I was having a chat with somebody. I met up with somebody like a month or two back, or maybe it was towards the end of last year. And we were talking about the situation in Gaza with the war in Gaza, and we were saying sort of how awful it was, how really sort of desperate the situation was there for people, and how much suffering was coming out of that. And I think I said something like, yes, and the really terrible thing about it is it'll probably get worse before it gets better. And my friend, who will go unnamed, turned to me and said, yes, but everything's impermanent. And I felt like turning him to and saying, yes, and other such Buddhist cliches. That was my sort of response. It was sort of very easy for him to go, yes, but everything's impermanent. It's so easy for us to say that here. It was sort of a bit of just a trite misunderstanding of the Buddha's teaching on impermanence. But it's very easy to do that. It's very easy to get wrong like that. Emptiness, again, a very similar thing. I mean, if you look, say, for example, at during World War II, a lot of the Japanese monks, Zen monks in Japan, excused war crimes or suicide bombers on the basis that you weren't killing anybody because there was no such thing as self. Yeah? So you couldn't get a more twisted version of what is a sacred teaching. You couldn't get a more sort of poisoned version of a sacred teaching. Dukkha doesn't tend to be sort of misunderstood that badly. It tends to, it's very hard to misunderstand it that badly. But maybe one of the ways that you can sort of pick it up in a slightly sort of trite or cliched way is a sort of slightly over kind of serious or po-faced sort of approach to spiritual life. The teaching, I'll say a bit about sort of what it means now in a second, but I mean basically what dukkha is a sense of sort of unsatisfactoriness, a sense that sort of life is just not quite satisfactory. Sometimes the image that's given of it is of an ill-fitting chariot wheel. So if you put a cartwheel or something like that, so back in the Buddha's time people would have got around by bullock and cart basically, and you could imagine if there was an ill-fitting sort of wheel that didn't kind of fit properly, you'd get this kind of bump along. You'd do that all the way along the road, wouldn't you? Which would be unsatisfactory. It would be unsatisfying. I don't know if people have seen, but there's a whole sort of YouTube and TikTok phenomenon of satisfying videos and unsatisfying videos. Yeah, satisfying videos where you get some sort of shape of jelly and it does it perfectly each time or something like that. It's really satisfying. And unsatisfying one is the opposite, whatever that is. Yeah. So life can just be a bit unsatisfying in that particular way, can't it? Sometimes in very, very significant ways, very, very painful ways. Sometimes dukkha is suffering, isn't it? Life can be desperately painful at times, but it's always unsatisfying. This is what the teaching is saying, is that it's always unsatisfying. There's always some little bit that you go, that could just be a little bit better. Say for example, if you sit down to watch a movie and you just get everything is sort of perfect, yeah. The lights are just perfect, yeah, nice, yeah. And then the curtains down is nice. And then the lighting, the sound, you sort of go up and down on the sound, and then eventually you get it to the right place, and it's just nice and warm. And you press play, and you go, what could make this better? And it's like, would ice cream make this better? Yeah. Would crisps make this better? Yeah. So there's always some sort of little bit of you that kind of isn't satisfied. And the Buddha said that this just runs all the way through life. Like your most elated, through unenlightened life, your most elated experiences are just marked by this just something not being quite right, just being a bit unsatisfactory. So it runs, dukkha in that sense of unsatisfactoriness runs all the way from very, very deep suffering, very deep pain, all the way through to just that slight sense that something's just not quite, it could be just a little bit better. It runs all the way through to them. But I think probably the kind of cliched version, the sort of more sort of you've picked it up the wrong way version of dukkha is something like spiritual life is a very serious business. It's a very serious business. One must never smile as a spiritual person, whatever that is. One can't ever laugh, anything like that. One can't crack a joke. And you do come across this. I think I sort of just picked it up somewhere. Probably my Catholic upbringing didn't help, I'm afraid. But, just that sense that spiritual life was somehow sort of dour or serious. You had to be sort of serious all the time. I think I clocked this as a view that I held at one point on retreat, and I thought, God, I just really, how is it I think that? Where have I picked that up from? But it's very easy to pick up sort of misapprehensions of these things. So the sort of cliched or the slightly trite or the wrong way of picking up unsatisfactoriness is the idea that, spiritual life, if we're approaching it in the right way, we're very serious all the time. We're very serious, very stoic, and etc., etc. I'll say a little bit more about that. Possibly, actually, it comes to what I was going to say next, because I think one of the ways that we pick up spiritual teachings in the wrong way is we relate it to something that we already know. And so it's slightly sort of, or something that we've already been taught in a similar sort of area, and it slightly contaminates it. Like, say, for example, now, I think there's a general sort of cultural sense, and I don't know how long it's been around, however long it's been around, but you get this idea of suffering as ennobling, don't you? As sort of somehow kind of bettering you just by the process of experiencing it. That somehow you sort of go through your kind of, the way it's sometimes talked about is you're made stronger by suffering, you grow through suffering, all of those things. If I didn't have that experience, I wouldn't be the person I am now. Now, that might be true. That might be true if you use the opportunity of pain or suffering in that particular way. But there's nothing necessarily true about it. Sometimes suffering is just brutalizing, isn't it? You see, people that have suffered enough just become hardened. If we suffer enough, we just become hardened. In the Buddha's teaching, traditionally in Buddhism, you use suffering, and you can use pain as a way of connecting with the universal reality of other people's pain. And that can sort of softens you up, opens you up to people, and it sort of makes more clear the connection you have with other people on that. But it needn't necessarily do that at all, actually. And I think for most people, suffering most of the time, particularly very intense suffering, just sort of hardens us. Now, probably my guess, that idea that suffering is somehow ennobling, comes from the idea that Jesus suffered for us, basically, died on the cross for us. The Christian idea that Christ's suffering redeemed us somehow. Yeah. So probably my guess is in the zeitgeist that suffering is associated with redemption, salvation, purification, all of those things from the idea that Jesus died for us on the cross. But it's just not a Buddhist idea. Buddhism just doesn't share that with Christianity, this sense of ennobling somehow being suffering being somehow ennobling. But you do hear it even in sort of Buddhist circles. You'll sort of see it creep up a little bit. Like, for example, these sort of conversations that you can have sometimes. The dreaded deep and meaningfuls. Do you ever get into a dreaded deep and meaningful? Like, you sometimes sit down, you're going, oh God, we're having a deep and meaningful, aren't we? And you're having a deep and meaningful because it's two people swapping their suffering. Yeah, it's two people talking about how much they've suffered. And And oftentimes what that is, I think, is because there's this sense again that spiritual life is about uncovering suffering somewhere. It's about uncovering all the way that we suffer. And so to communicate from a sort of deep place means to communicate your suffering in a particular way, or your pain in a particular way. And that a sort of deeper communication is a communication around your suffering. Now, it might actually be that, I mean, one of the things that is nice about the Buddhist Sangha is that you can talk about those sorts of things. But it's not necessarily that it makes that suffering is sort of more real than pleasure, or more somehow kind of more deep than joy, or anything like that. You could have a deep and meaningful, and express nothing but joy and inspiration. In fact, it's a much better conversation to have. Everybody walks away happier after that particular conversation than a sort of swapping of suffering. Although you might also do that. You know, it is also nice to be open in how life can be hard, but it doesn't mean you have to do it every time. Yeah? So you sort of get this, and again, it sort of just creeps in. Similarly with retreats, you ever sort of people sort of judging their retreat on the basis of how difficult it was when they come back. You know, people come back from retreat, and you go, how was it? And they go, oh, it was very good. It was very good. I went very deep, I did. And I go, all right. What happened? It was very painful. All the way through. Very intense. Very, very painful. I went very deep. Yeah. So again, it's this sort of idea that the harder the retreat has been, the deeper that you've gone, or something like that, or the more kind of intensely painful the experience, the deeper that you've got. Again, there might be some truth to it. It would be you'd have to go individual by individual. It could be that you're just a big, mope or something like that. You just need to give yourself a good talking to, and just start to notice what's good and pleasurable and right in your experience as well, and not be orientating yourself to sort of suffering and difficulty all the time. Sometimes we can just put suffering right at the heart of our spiritual life, and everything that we do in our spiritual life is then about kind of healing or something like that. Now, of course, the likelihood then is if your spiritual life is about that, you're just going to consistently recreate your trauma, because you've put it right at the heart of your spiritual practice, and you've possibly put that right at the heart of your life. So everything starts to kind of refer to pain or trauma or difficulty, whatever it might be. And so, when you give something that much attention and that much sort of energy, well, it's going to hang around. It's just, it's part of the way that you've sort of framed your experience, so it's just going to sort of hang around. I had a friend not that long ago. Jesus, I'm dropping my friends in it this evening. But, I had a friend many years ago, and he was saying that he was going to take a year. He'd sort of fried himself from working in a corporate job for the last few years. He's completely exhausted, and he had a whole boat of sort of minor kind of physical ailments that he'd picked up from various things. He probably needed a good holiday or something like that. And he'd left his job. His partners had bought him out. He was a partner in the businesses, so the partners had bought him out. And he was going to do a year of healing. And this year of healing was going to involve sort of energy crystals and, massage and various other sort of, diets and juices and all the rest of it for a year. And I thought, well, you might as well call it a year of sickness. Because if you're going to do a year of healing, healing presumes sickness. So if I were you, I'd do a year of I'm absolutely fine. That would be a much better sort of thing to go about, because it doesn't put sort of difficulty and suffering and pain and illness and trauma, whatever it might be, right at the heart of this kind of thing that you're going to do. So you can give pain too little attention, suffering too little attention, and actually you can give it too much as well. Sometimes actually we sort of rock from one experience to the other. you might walk into the center for the first time and maybe you haven't given your difficulty and pain enough attention. It's been like screaming at you for years, for example, but you've done your very best to sort of ignore it. You've worked yourself into the ground, or like, you've got an addiction, you've got alcohol problems, you've got drug problems, whatever it might be. And it's because, there's all this pain that you sort of look to ignore. And then sometimes what can happen is you just fly over to the complete opposite extreme, whereas you just start to give it far too much attention, and it just becomes sort of all about what your life is about. So there's those two extremes. So sort of just to put it out to people here. What sort of ways do we suffer? What are the sort of varieties in the way that we sort of find life unsatisfactory, sometimes sort of completely painful, or just slightly on the sort of unsatisfactory side? I mean, just to ask you. Yeah.
Unforeseen events.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so things maybe that you, what's the word that you're looking for?
Outside of our control.
Expectation. I think it's something like expectations or assumptions, isn't it? It's the expectation or assumption that life will go a particular way, and then it goes a different way, and that causes pain, doesn't it?
Right.
Yeah. That's right.
Very good way of putting it.
Yeah. So that's definitely one sort of life not going to plan. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Regretting the past.
2 seconds. Sorry. We'll just go over here, and then I'll come to you. Yeah.
Comparison.
Yes. So comparing ourselves to other people, and that can be, well, it's probably always painful, even when we sort of see ourselves as being above people, don't we? It's sort of always, because that's disconnected. You're disconnected from people. So comparison is definitely a form of suffering. Yeah.
Regretting the past.
Yes. Yeah. That's right. So what sort of, that's something like pain that comes from maybe from unskillful behavior or something like that. Actually, and that's quite a positive experience in Buddhism. It's called hri. It's translated something like regret, a positive sense of regret, and that is painful. And also in Buddhism is actually very positive as well. It's one of the most positive things you can experience, according to some in the Buddhist tradition.
Feeling guilt.
Yes, so that's a different issue, isn't it? And that's when it becomes problematic, isn't it? It's like, because guilt is a different thing. Guilt, Buddhism explains guilt as being the fear of being rejected by the group if people knew what a bad person we were, that type of thing. So it's different from a sort of sense of genuinely being sort of regretful and sorry about our past behaviour because we know it's hurt somebody. So that sort of pain.
The clinging of your mind.
Clinging, craving. Yeah, that's right. So sort of wanting something and particularly not getting it, isn't it? Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Sometimes it's said actually that the pain of craving, when actually it's Bhante Sangharakshita, the man who founded this movement, he said, when you get something that you really want, he thought that actually the pleasure that came from that wasn't actually a net positive. He thought what it was the relief of the pain from wanting that thing and not having it. He thought you didn't actually come out sort of net plus. You sort of came out completely neutral, but you'd stop banging your head against a wall. And so there was that suffering that was relieved through that. Yeah. Maybe we'll just do one more if that's okay. We'll could do two more. Yeah.
Fear of death or fear of suffering?
Yeah. So fear, so emotional pain as well, anger, all of those things, isn't it? That's definitely very painful. Fear, yeah. And we'll do one last one, just to the back here. Yeah.
Is physical suffering?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Like illness and getting old. It just inevitably involves pain, doesn't it? Yeah. So there's that. There's pain and all those sorts of various different ways. So that all of those are good examples. And the Buddha would say that you could put them under three major headings. The first heading, which is dukkha. That's what this particular heading is called, dukkha. And that's just pain. Yeah, so that is just straightforward, a bit like you were saying. That's just straightforward bodily pain. And the Buddha would say that is completely inevitable. You come in to the world, the first thing that you get is a spank on the arse, and that is pain. You have been sort of kicked out from your nice, warm, sort of cozy womb and thrust into the world, rudely turned upside down, and so your first experience is an experience of pain, isn't it? That's an experience of pain, and that's how you go out of the world as well. So that death always inevitably, almost inevitably, I would imagine, involves some sort of pain. So that's how you get, and there's all the sort of ailments and everything like that comes with it. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think more and more now you're getting a kind of a sort of neurotic fear of that type of pain, a sort of neurotic fear of physical pain, and you see it in various different places. So you see it with sort of health fanatics, don't you? Health and fitness fanatics, or sort of diet fanatics, or whatever it might be, where you have some sort of extensive sort of yoga routine, health and fitness routine, whatever it might be. Similarly, you take all these kind of juices, you do fasts, you various Chinese medicines, all of that. You get the sense from it all that it's a slightly sort of sickly kind of neurotic fear of the inevitability of pain in your life. A kind of just desperate wish not to feel pain. But you will feel pain. I mean, and it's not to say that there's anything wrong with, exercising and taking care of yourself and watching what you eat and everything like that. But it gets to a point very often with people where you think, oh no, there's something else going on there. There's somebody that's desperately afraid of getting old, of falling sick, of all of those things, and thinks that they can control that through various sort of regimens. And you just see sort of more and more of it. It's interesting because it's a focus on health, but actually what it appears is actually quite sickly. It sort of appears sort of frail, scared, sickly, all of those sort of feeble, all of those sorts of things. There's a sort of desperate kind of fear that seems to be behind it, even though the sort of ostensibly on the surface it's given this sort of glowing kind of vitality. The marketing is glow and vitality and sort of health and all the rest of it, actually. But actually the sense is that often it just looks a bit sort of fearful and feeble. So you get this sort of fear of pain. So you get that sort of pain. You get or that sort of unsatisfactoriness, that type of dukkha, and you also get the dukkha of change, and this is called viparinama dukkha, and this is basically not getting what you want. This is the dukkha of change, and we know that, don't we? Just sort of life just doesn't give us what we want at times. It's what people are talking about, expectations. Life. You think that life is going to, or you hope that life is going to go a certain way, and it comes along and it just does something completely different. Yeah. So you don't get what you want, and that's unsatisfying, isn't it? And what the Buddha says is, the way he puts it, is that you're always kind of brought up against what you don't want and separated from what you do want. And this sort of just happens through the day, doesn't it? You walk into a room where you really hope that person that you really don't want to be in a room with isn't at the other side of the door, and there they are. And you're connected with what you don't want. And there's the unsatisfactoriness, there's the dukkha of that. And there's that person that you really want to sort of, I don't know, message you back, or you'd wish they'd call, or whatever it might be. And they don't. And so you get separated from what you do want. And that's unsatisfactory as well. That's painful, isn't it? And we just kind of, you can think of it, we sort of just pick a fight with reality on this sort of way, won't we? We just sort of pick a fight with the world. And who's going to win? You know, us or reality or the world? And there's no point. What is the point in picking a fight with reality? And there is absolutely no point. You're not going to win that. But we do it all the time, don't we? We just do it. That's the thing we do. We pick a fight with the world. We pick a fight with reality. So then there's the question, the last manifestation of dukkha, and it's sankhara dukkha. And this is this dukkha I was talking about, the dukkha of not being enlightened. So it's the sort of the constant feeling that something's just not quite right. So you could almost sort of describe this as kind of existential angst or existential sort of unsatisfactoriness, something like that. So the Buddha would say that anything short of enlightenment is going to be sort of unsatisfactory in some sort of way. I think I'm right in saying this. I think he sort of described it like a thorn. It's just there. It's just kind of there all the time. Enlightenment sort of digs it out, but anything short of that is just there all the time. So you get this sort of sense that something's not quite right. Could just be just that little bit better. Even when you're very happy, very joyful, feeling really connected, feeling like life is meaningful, everything like that. Even in the most positive sort of mental states in that sort of way, there's always just that sense that something is not quite right. We're slightly sort of misaligned with reality. We're slightly out of connection, and something is just not quite right on that. Yeah. But strangely enough, somehow it gives rise to joy. This question. So it's interesting, isn't it? So why is it, for example, that a tradition that teaches that one of the three marks of existence, one of the three marks of samsara, normal unenlightened experience, is unsatisfactoriness. Why is it that in that system then, that when people follow it, you know, you go to the countries in the East, say for example, where Buddhism is widely practiced, and often what you meet is just very joyful people. So how is it that suffering often, you know, you'd think it might make you a bit dour, but often it sort of translates to joy? So I thought I'd ask, what do you think? Why do you think that teaching often sort of amounts to joy?
Nothing lasts.
No,
I'm afraid now for saying that.
Nothing lasts.
Like the
Yeah.
impermanence.
Well, that's part of it, isn't it? It's sort of a sense that, although it's possibly more related to impermanence, so we might come back to that. But yeah.
Because it's like revealing what doesn't work, and then implicitly pointing to what will provide
Right.
lasting satisfaction.
Right.
And it's not this way.
Yeah.
Where you're
Right.
seeking
Right.
that satisfaction isn't here.
Yes. Yeah.
Turning it around.
That's right. Yeah. So the idea that, well, Buddhism also does that. It talks about what gives rise to suffering as well, which I haven't sort of gone into. I might, possibly won't give that an opportunity. We will talk about how you know suffering does go to joy, but yes, that's right. Yes, so there's an alternative there as well. You don't have to do it. You don't have to look for joy in this particular place. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Just in the back.
Mainly for the human, it makes unhappy because of the greediness.
Yeah. Can you say a little bit more?
Mainly, people are unhappy because of the greediness.
Yes. Yeah.
When greedy comes, then obviously that makes at certain point that the greedy makes him to be unhappy. Like,
Yes.
I want more, then he can't get more. Then, I was supposed to get it, I could get it. Like in our language we call, in the same Buddha teach in our language, asaye dukkha ke mula karana. That means if you want people more greedy, that is the main reason of people suffering.
Yeah. So that's the second noble truth, isn't it? The idea that that suffering arises on the basis of craving. So we crave, we want things, and that gives rise to suffering. Yeah. So again, I think it's similar to the previous point where it's saying, look, this is what results in suffering. You can go a different direction. Yeah. Yeah. And do one last one.
Yeah, I'm just going to say that maybe it's a feeling of acceptance of suffering as
Yes.
part of life.
Yeah, yeah.
And that you might as well just build some sort of happiness in
Yeah,
your life.
yeah. I think that's a significant part of it, actually. I mean, I was just thinking of this today, and I think that's quite a big bit. Because, I mean, I don't know about you all, but I think possibly we're not taught. It would be better if we were sort of taught when we were younger how difficult life can get, because it wouldn't make you feel so sort of broken when you sort of experience it as difficult. It wouldn't feel like something had gone desperately wrong in the master plan when you sort of experience it as painful. I definitely, I when I was a young man, I had very sort of intense depression in my late teens and early 20s. And part of me just thought that I'd just not got the manuscript somewhere. Like it was like, who didn't send me the user guide? Because this is very, very painful. And of course, I was young, so all my friends also found it very painful. Of course, you don't say that to each other when you're young. You sort of do the kind of, you market a very kind of upbeat, kind of happy version of yourself. So the idea that sort of life involved difficulty and suffering was just completely like not right. So when I started to suffer a lot and feel very painful, it was like something had gone wrong, or I was somehow fundamentally wrong, or something like that. I think it's right. This teaching is pointed to that. No, look, that is just part of life. That's one of the challenges of life that comes up. It's not all of life, but it is certainly certain sections of life, isn't it? And various times in life, periods of life, sometimes longer than otherwise, can just be hard. Don't worry about it. It's not you. It's fine. It is okay. That is just part of being alive and human. That's part of it.
It's also nice that you can actually cultivate joy, as you guys teach here. And
Yeah.
even in these moments, there is something that you can work on, and you don't have to give up to the inevitable pain.
Yes, that's right. So you don't turn passive to it either. It's like, oh yeah, okay, no, I can work with this. So there is pain and suffering there, but how do I work with it? Yeah, so you can work with it as well. So maybe it's that, sort of when we're younger, we need to sort of tell more stories of suffering. There needs to be less happy ever after, and more isn't life really hard? The stories of people who were born with illnesses and all sorts of things, go through life with all of those illnesses, die young, all of those things, that those are stories that are told as well. That's part of the human experience, and it might actually be that we need to start telling those stories to people when they're younger, and not only the happy ever after, because they're not particularly sort of real in a certain sense. Those stories have something to them, don't they? But also, maybe we need to be telling different stories too. So there is a point, and I do want to talk about this as well, because there is a point actually where, and many of you have pointed to it here. It's actually, we talk about dukkha or unsatisfactoriness to sort of understand it and see how can we start to transcend it. The Buddha said that all he ever taught was suffering and the transcendence of suffering, i.e. the path to enlightenment. So how do we start to transcend dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, in our sort of day-to-day life? And it arises in multiple places actually in the Buddhist teaching, dukkha, so it's part of the lakshanas, it's one of the 3 lakshanas. It's also, as we mentioned earlier, this gentleman was saying, is one of the 4 noble truths. And basically saying that dukkha arises on the basis of craving. So when we crave things, when we want things, that gives rise to suffering. Even when we want something to go away, when we crave something to go away. So when we're averse to something, like say when we're averse to somebody or when we don't like somebody, what the Buddhist tradition says actually is that also that is a form of craving. It's craving for a different experience than from what we're having now. So craving is understood as the root poison in Buddhism. It's the sort of the original sin, to use an idea. Don't take that too literally, but it's the sort of original sin. It is craving. All the other issues that give rise to difficulty in our life, delusion, hatred, all of those things come from this sort of root poison of we should keep on. Comes from this root poison of craving. So craving gives rise to unsatisfactoriness in that sort of sense. And what's interesting is that unsatisfactoriness also gives rise to craving. So craving gives rise to unsatisfactoriness or suffering, and then that suffering in turn gives rise to craving. So what you have then is that you're straight into a spiral, aren't you? And you'll sort of recognize that in your life as well, don't you? I certainly recognize it in my life as well. So I get a craving for something. On the basis of that unsatisfactoriness, dukkha arises, sometimes suffering, pain arises. And then I start desperately craving something to try and get myself out of that. You get yourself into a bad mood, for example. Then because the bad mood is so sort of strong and you're so averse to it, you crave such a different state. More craving arises and you go to, Netflix, alcohol, porn, sex, whatever it might be. Any of the things that you sort of use to get away from difficulty in your life, to sort of manage difficulty in life, which is also craving, which gives rise to more dukkha. So you can see how you sort of get into these kind of spirals of sort of getting worse and worse and worse. And that happens in life as well, doesn't it? Where, say, for example, something negative happens in somebody's life, and you get this sort of spiral that just sort of reinforces itself over and over and over. So you get these kind of, you see that. You get this effect. You see it in sport as well. It's interesting. You ever see things in sport where you get this kind of spiral where something gets augmented on each other, particularly where psychology is really big. So if you ever see people in a sort of tennis rally, you get points in a tennis match where things swing, don't you? It goes from sort of one person to another. You get, say, for example, a really long rally. You get those incredible rallies in tennis, don't you, that last, minutes. And you know that whoever wins that rally, it's a really significant moment for them. Because on that basis, you get these sort of augmented spiral effects. You get somebody starts to get a bit of confidence and they relax a bit, so they start playing better, which reinforces that. You get more confidence, you relax more, you start playing better. And of course, the other person's going the other direction. They're starting to really doubt themselves, so they start playing worse. They get tight. They start playing worse, and you get these sort of augmented spiral effects. And that also has something that you get that negatively embosomed from craving to dukkha to craving and back around. But you also get this positive effect as well, actually. And in Buddhism, that's symbolized by the positive Nidana chain, this sort of positive spiral where you start to go around, where you sort of get off this thing of going around and around and around and around and around. That's the sort of wheel of life, where you sort of find yourself back again time after time after time at the same sort of point. And you might recognize that, don't you, where you're like, God, I'm here again. I'm here again. I've been fired again. Or something along those lines. I'm dating my mother again. I'm dating my father again. Yeah, I'm back here at this point again. And you go back to your sort of habitual responses to it, your cravings to it, your strategy for dealing with it. You find yourself back on that point again. Well, Buddhism says that that happens, but also there's a point off of that. And the point off of that is the point of dukkha. So in the positive nidana chain, this spiral chain, you can start to come back upwards. And you get this positive augmenting spiral that goes around and around and around and around, where one effect leads on to another, leads to onto another. And the point that happens is that at dukkha, and dukkha leading not to more craving, but dukkha leading to faith. So shraddha, faith. And faith in this sense is meant something like that there is a better way of doing this. So that the Buddha pointed that out. So that faith in Buddhism is faith in the Buddha's enlightenment, and faith that his teaching can actually start to move you up along the spiritual life, that you start to progress in the spiritual life. And the point that happens is the point of dukkha, the point of difficulty or unsatisfactoriness or suffering. So when we get back to, say, a certain point, when we think about this in our lives, we might just be back at a certain point again. And instead of going, let's give the dice another roll at the same thing that has never worked for us time and time again, we think, maybe I could do something differently. Maybe I'll go along to the Buddhist center. Maybe I'll actually try out that thing that they talk about, where I sort of sit with my experience, or I give somebody a gift or something like that, and let's see what happens. And it's not like you sort of reach this point once and for all at life and you start to just sort of spiral up. It's like a point that happens day after day. There's opportunities for it day after day. There's unsatisfactoriness there. I'm back at this point again. I've fallen out with somebody again, or here we are, I'm back in that same dynamic. Is there something I can do? Can I recall one of the Buddha's teachings? Can I have faith in his teaching, in enlightened beings' teachings, that you can transcend that difficulty if you start to put the teachings into practice? So faith in this instance is that there is an alternative, and that often comes at the point of difficulty. And this is what we mean by the creative path. So the creative path is creating something new out of sort of the habitual, you could say, doing something different, positive, out of the habitual. So you have this reactive cyclic process of dukkha going around craving, going around dukkha, going around craving, going around and round and round and round. And you have this creative process, which is more like that positive augmenting spiral that goes up and up and up and up, and goes round and round, up and up and up, but does so at the point of unsatisfactoriness, or does so at the point of suffering. And so it's important to sort of notice when we're not satisfied, because that's the point where you can go, okay, but I can have faith that another way is possible. There's something different for me that's possible. When I first stepped into the Dublin Buddhist Centre, I'd had these sort of burnouts. I kept on having these burnouts. I played a lot of sport when I was younger, and actually what I found it was a way to sort of manage my very difficult mental states, was just to do really intense, heavy exercise. So I just burnt out like consistently in my 20s, and I kept on having these sort of relapses. And the last one, I thought, I wonder maybe I could step into the Dublin Buddhist Centre. So that's what I did. And that was the most significant one of the most significant turning points of life. And often we find that the turning points of our life come at points of unsatisfactoriness, isn't it? Or pain or suffering. We go, well, I can't keep doing this. You sometimes say it to a friend, don't you? You want to go, well, how's that working out for you? And it sort of, the question might shake them up, and they go, well, okay, well, maybe I could do something different. So often we suffer because we think we just can't do anything different. But what the Buddha is saying is that you can. You can take the opportunity of unsatisfactoriness and start to move on the spiral of faith. Faith that you can become a Buddha. That's actually the teaching. That's the basic teaching. That not only can you transcend your normal habitual difficulties, but if you give it enough effort, practice, that you can become a Buddha. So that is unsatisfactoriness. So just to sort of round up a bit, we've heard a bit about how dukkha can be picked up wrong. In fact, how any of these wisdom teachings can be picked up wrong. They're very, very easy to pick up wrong. When they're picked up wrong, they can go quite badly. Not that that's a reason not to try, but that they can go quite badly. Dukkha is sometimes picked up slightly wrong as being a sort of giving more sort of reality to suffering than joy. The idea that actually suffering is more real than joy. Sometimes that's how we misunderstand this particular teaching, and we orientate our life to sort of uncovering and investigating suffering too much, because we think it's actually the real stuff of life, much more real than sort of joy or something like that. Actually, what Buddhism says is there's much more of reality in these positive mental states of connection, joy, happiness, all of those things. That when you are connected and joyful, linked in with other people, generous, loving, kind, friendly, courageous, that you are much more in alignment with reality than when we're in the midst and in the mire of suffering. We might need to start there, but we don't have to stay there. So that's how sometimes dukkha can be misunderstood. And we heard that there's 3 varieties of dukkha: the dukkha of just straightforward pain, the dukkha of change, or of getting what we don't want and not getting what we do want, and the dukkha of not being enlightened, so the unsatisfactoriness of not being enlightened. And importantly, what we also heard is that the teaching of dukkha is pointing to us where we can start to get off the wheel of the habitual tendencies towards the same patternings of unsatisfactoriness, the same situations of unsatisfactoriness over and over again. We can have faith in the Buddha's teaching, and we can start to change for the better. Yeah. So why don't we leave it at that? What we might do is just have a minute or two just to meditate and just settle again, and then we'll just leave it at that. So why don't we set up to that? So just coming into a sense of our physical experience. Connecting with the breath. We can just send ourselves well-wishing. We quite naturally, quite healthily want to be happy, want the best for ourselves. And we can just wish ourselves well on that basis. And similarly, all living beings also want to be happy, also wish themselves well, want the best for themselves, just like us. And we can wish them well in that as well. So wishing all living beings well. May they be happy. May we be free from suffering. Okay, so that's it for this evening, folks. Very good to see you all, and do come back next week for Impermanence with Kusosara. Fantastic. See you all then. Take care.